The crystal champagne flute felt like ice in her trembling hand. Across the opulent ballroom, her ex-husband Preston was laughing, his arm draped around his new bride. Just moments ago, that bride had stood on stage and in front of 300 of New York's elite called her out by name, mocking her second-hand dress and the quiet, simple life she now lived. The room's pity was a physical weight pressing down, suffocating her. They all saw her as the pathetic first wife, the starter chapter in Preston's grand novel. But they have no idea about the story's final shocking twist. They don't know who she really is. And in about 5 minutes, their entire world, and especially Preston's, is going to detonate. Stay with me to witness the most satisfying wedding demolition you will ever hear. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't delivered by a normal postal worker, but by a courier, the kind that requires a signature and makes you feel important even if you're standing in the peeling hallway of a 4th-floor walk-up in Queens. Audrina Shaw signed the digital pad, her hand steady, but her heart had already begun a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. The envelope was thick cream-colored cardstock, impossibly heavy. The edges were lined in gold leaf, and her name was calligraphed in an elegant looping script that she recognized instantly. It was Bianca Montgomery's handwriting. Even the ink seemed to mock her. Inside the card was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Montgomery request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Bianca to Mr. Preston Vanderbilt. The wedding was to be held at the Oheka Castle on Long Island, a place so extravagant it was rumored to have inspired the Gatsby Mansion. The date was just 3 weeks away. Tucked inside was a smaller, more personal note on matching stationery. Audrina, it read, I know this might be awkward, but Preston and I truly feel that your presence would mean the world. It would signify true closure and prove there are no hard feelings. We've all moved on to better things, haven't we? Please say you'll come. B. Audrina sank onto her worn velvet armchair, the one she'd found on the curb, and reupholstered herself. The note was a dagger wrapped in silk. Every word was a calculated jab. Awkward. Closure. No hard feelings. And the final brutal twist of the knife. We've all moved on to better things. Her life with Preston had been a 5-year lesson in gradual erasure. She had met him at a small gallery opening where he, a struggling painter, was showcasing his work. She was working part-time at the New York Public Library, finding solace in the quiet hum of the reading rooms, deliberately living a life far removed from the one she had fled. He was charming and tense, and saw in her what he wanted to see: a blank canvas. A pretty, intelligent girl with no family to speak of. No connections, no ambition that could possibly overshadow his own. She had loved him, or at least she'd loved the man she thought he was. She supported him completely. Her modest librarian salary paid for their tiny Brooklyn apartment, his expensive oil paints, his canvases, his tailored clothes that made him look the part of the successful artist he so desperately wanted to be. She cooked his meals, cleaned his studio, and was his ever-present silent cheerleader at every gallery show where his work was inevitably overlooked. The cracks began to show slowly then, all at once. His frustration with his stalled career was never his fault. It was hers. If you just had better connections, Audrina, he'd say, swirling a glass of cheap wine she'd bought. If your family wasn't a complete void, we could be networking. Do you have any idea how much easier it would be if I could just mention your father's name at one of these events? She would remain silent. He knew nothing of her father or her grandfather. She had told him she was an orphan raised in the system, a story that was simple and tragic enough to stop further questions. It was a lie, but it was a necessary shield. The truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous to the quiet life she was trying to build. He started belittling her job. A librarian. It's so quaint. So small. Don't you want more for yourself, for us? He mocked her clothes, which were always neat and clean, but from thrift stores or discount racks. He'd point out women on the street. Look at her bag. That's a Bottega Veneta. That's what success looks like. It's about presentation, Audrina, something you've never understood. The final blow came in the form of Bianca Montgomery. Bianca's father was a mid-level investment banker, not fabulously wealthy by New York standards, but with enough money and a wide enough social circle to make Preston's eyes gleam with avarice. Bianca was everything Audrina wasn't: loud, immaculately dressed in designer labels, dripping with an entitlement that she wore like expensive perfume. She met Preston at a gallery, and within a week she was funding his new studio space in Chelsea. The divorce was swift and brutal. Preston told her he needed someone who could operate on his level, someone who understood the mechanics of success. He made her feel like a failure, a weight he was finally shrugging off so he could soar. He took everything: the few pieces of art she'd actually liked, the nicer furniture she'd painstakingly restored, and her dignity. He left her with the worn-out armchair and a mountain of self-doubt. Now, holding this invitation, she felt the old wounds ache. Why invite her? It wasn't for closure. It was a victory lap. They wanted a front-row seat for her humiliation. They wanted to parade their new glossy life in front of the drab, discarded one. They wanted to see her flinch. For 2 days she debated. Part of her wanted to burn the invitation, to block their numbers, to disappear completely. But another part, a small, resilient ember that Preston had never managed to extinguish, began to glow. What if she went? What if she faced them not as the mousy librarian they remembered, but as herself? What if she showed them that she was not broken, not sad, not even remotely impressed? The decision solidified on the 3rd day. She was rereading the note, and the phrase, "We've all moved on to better things," snagged in her mind. It was true. She had moved on. In the year since the divorce, she had slowly started to piece her life back together. And she had, after years of silence, reconnected with the one person she had run away from. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Hello?" A gruff, familiar voice answered. Grandfather Audrina said, her voice clearer and stronger than it had been in years. "It's me." A pause, then Audrina. "I was wondering when you'd tire of playing peasant." "I'm not tired of it," she replied calmly. "But I've been invited to a wedding. My ex-husband's. I think it's time I stopped hiding." She could almost hear the slow, calculating smile forming on the other end of the line. "Oh," her grandfather Cormac Kensington purred. "Do tell me more." She told him everything. About Preston, about Bianca, about the invitation. She didn't have to explain the subtext. He understood power and cruelty better than anyone. When she finished, there was a long silence. "So this little painter thinks he discarded a stone." Cormac finally said, his voice laced with cold fury, when all along he was holding a diamond. "We can't have that. People need to learn the value of things. What do you need from me, child?" "Nothing," Audrina said. "I don't want your money or your power to crush them. I just want to go hold my head high and leave. I need to do it for myself." "Admirable, but insufficient," Cormac retorted. "You will go. You will hold your head high. But you will not go as Audrina Shaw, the librarian. You will go as my granddaughter. And you will not just leave. You will make an exit that they will talk about for a generation. Jonathan will handle the details. Just tell him what you require." Jonathan Davenport was her grandfather's right-hand man, the family's chief counsel and fixer. He was more terrifying than a platoon of soldiers. After the call, Audrina walked to her small closet. She pushed past the sensible cardigans and practical blouses until her fingers brushed against a garment bag at the very back. Inside was a dress she hadn't worn in years. A simple, elegant, slate-gray sheath dress. It was understated, almost plain, but she knew the label sewn into the silk lining: Chanel. It was the last gift her grandmother had given her. It was a dress of quiet confidence, of hidden strength. It was perfect. She would go to the wedding. She would wear this dress. She would play the part of the humble ex-wife. And she would let Preston and Bianca have their moment of triumph. Because the best performances, she knew, saved the final stunning reveal for the 3rd act. The drive out to Oheka Castle was a journey into another world. Audrina had taken the Long Island Railroad to a nearby town, and then a taxi, a deliberate choice to arrive like the commoner they expected her to be. As the taxi wound its way up the long gravel driveway, the castle loomed into view, a French-style chateau of impossible size and grandeur. Manicured gardens stretched for acres dotted with classical statues and bubbling fountains. Valets in crisp uniforms were whisking away Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. It was a monument to new money's desperate attempt to look like old money. It was, in a word, Preston's paradise. Audrina paid the taxi driver her simple gray dress and small clutch feeling woefully inadequate amidst the sea of couture gowns and glittering jewels. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked towards the grand entrance. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and money. She gave her name, Audrina Shaw, to the woman at the welcome table who had to scan down the guest list twice before finding it near the bottom. The woman's smile was tight with professional pity. Of course. Welcome. Stepping into the main hall was like stepping into a gilded cage. A string quartet played Vivaldi from a mezzanine, their music barely audible over the boisterous chatter of the guests. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and ludicrously small canapés. Everyone seemed to know everyone, air-kissing and laughing with a practiced hollow sound. The first person to spot her was Genevieve Vanderbilt Preston's mother. A woman sculpted from silicone and condescension, she was wearing a tight gold-sequined dress that was at least 2 decades too young for her. Her eyes, narrowed in a permanent state of disapproval, scanned Audrina from head to toe. Audrina. "My dear Genevieve," said her voice dripping with false sweetness. She glided over her bracelets, jangling. "How brave of you to come." Genevieve, Audrina replied with a calm, small smile. Preston and Bianca insisted. "It's a beautiful venue." Yes, well, Bianca has exquisite taste. Something Preston has finally come to appreciate in a partner. She said, her gaze flicking pointedly over Audrina's simple dress. "You're looking healthy." It was the kind of word one used to describe a rescued farm animal. "I'm very well." "Thank you," Audrina said, refusing to take the bait. Is that dress from that little vintage shop you used to love in the village?" Genevieve pressed, leaning in conspiratorially to an equally lacquered friend. She was always so wonderfully frugal. The friend, a woman named Bitsy, or Muffy Audrina couldn't recall, gave a tittering laugh. "Oh, how charming. It's so important to be resourceful, isn't it?" Audrina simply smiled and excused herself, moving deeper into the crowd. But it was the same everywhere she went. People who had known her when she was with Preston now looked at her with a mixture of morbid curiosity and disdain. Whispers followed her like a foul wind. Is that her, the first wife? My God, she actually came. Doesn't she have any pride? Look at her dress. It's positively funereal. Someone should tell her it's a wedding. Preston did so well for himself trading up. Bianca's family has a place in the Hamptons, you know. She found a quiet corner near a large window overlooking the gardens. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and held at the cold glass a small anchor in the overwhelming sea of hostility. This was harder than she'd imagined. It wasn't just about Preston and Bianca. It was the collective judgment of their entire social sphere. They had all bought into the narrative. Preston was the brilliant artist on the rise, and she was the dead weight he'd had the good sense to cut loose. Then she saw him. Preston was holding court near the grand staircase, looking insufferably pleased with himself. He was wearing a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his hair perfectly coiffed. He wasn't a struggling artist anymore. He was a brand. And Bianca was his prize acquisition. She was standing beside him, radiant in a Vera Wang gown that must have cost more than Audrina's annual salary. Her diamond necklace caught the light of the chandeliers, scattering tiny, sharp rainbows across the room. Their eyes met across the crowd. Preston's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise that she had actually shown up. Then it was replaced by a look of pure, smug satisfaction. He excused himself from his circle and started making his way towards her with Bianca on his arm. The shark was coming to inspect the bait. "Audrina." "You came," Preston said, his voice smooth and patronizing. "I'm so glad." "You invited me," she said simply, her gaze even. Bianca's smile was as bright and hard as her diamonds. "We're thrilled. It's just so mature of everyone, don't you think? It shows there's no bitterness." She looked Audrina up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal. "That's a lovely dress. Very understated." "Thank you, Bianca. Congratulations to you both. You seem very happy," Audrina said, the picture of grace. Her composure seemed to annoy them. They had been expecting tears or a scene. "Oh, we are," Preston gushed, pulling Bianca closer. "It's amazing what can happen when your partner is a true equal. Someone who inspires you, who pushes you to be your best self. Bianca's father just connected me with a gallery owner in Zurich. We're talking about a solo show next spring." It was a direct hit, a reminder of all the times he'd lamented her lack of connections. Audrina just nodded. "That's wonderful news, Preston. And what about you?" Bianca chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "Still at the library, stamping books and shushing people. It must be so peaceful." "There's a lot to be said for peace," Audrina replied, taking a small sip of her champagne. Their attack wasn't working. Her refusal to be baited, her calm dignity, was like a shield they couldn't penetrate. So Preston went for a lower blow. "You know," he said, leaning in as if sharing a secret, "I was worried about you after the split. I know things must be tight. If you ever need anything seriously, don't let pride get in the way. I'd be happy to help you out, for old time's sake." He was offering her charity. In front of his new bride, in front of this whole crowd of gawkers who were pretending not to listen. It was the ultimate power play, casting himself as the benevolent, successful man and her as the pitiful charity case. This was the moment to let her mask slip, to let the fire she was holding back flare up. But she didn't. She held his gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, and said, "That's very generous of you, Preston. But I'm fine. Truly. You should get back to your guests. It's your big day." She turned her gaze to Bianca. "May your life together be everything you deserve." She delivered the line with such sincerity that it took a moment for the double meaning to land. She watched them walk away, Preston looking slightly confused, Bianca preening. They thought they had won this round. They had paraded their success and her supposed failure, and she had taken it with a quiet smile. They had no idea that her calm was not submission. It was the eerie, silent stillness before a tsunami. The ceremony was about to begin. Guests were ushered from the grand hall into a vast, sun-drenched conservatory for the ceremony. The room was a fantasy of white. Thousands of white roses and orchids were woven into arches and hung in fragrant garlands from the ceiling. A white aisle runner stretched between rows of chairs draped in white silk, leading to a small elevated platform where Preston and the officiant stood waiting. It was beautiful, sterile, and suffocatingly pretentious. Audrina found a seat at the very back, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible. But there was no hiding. She could feel the stares, the whispers slithering through the rows. She was a ghost at the feast, a living embodiment of the past, that everyone was here to celebrate, leaving behind. The string quartet began playing Pachelbel's canon, the universal signal for a wedding to commence. The guests rose. Down the aisle came Bianca on the arm of her flushed, beaming father. She was a vision of bridal perfection. Her dress, with its intricate lacework and long train, was a masterpiece. Her veil was held in place by a diamond tiara. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. A very smug, very cruel princess. When she reached the altar, Preston took her hand, his eyes shining with an emotion that Audrina knew all too well. It wasn't love. It was acquisition. He was looking at Bianca the way he looked at a painting he'd just sold for a high price, a symbol of his own elevated status. The ceremony was traditional, filled with readings about love and partnership that felt hollow and false, coming from the mouths of friends who had witnessed Preston's casual cruelty to Audrina for years. Audrina kept her face a placid mask, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. She wasn't mourning the loss of Preston. She was mourning the years she had lost to him, the pieces of herself she had given away to a man who saw her as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. Then came the vows. Bianca went first, her voice clear and strong, reciting a promise she had clearly memorized. "Preston, my love," she began, her eyes locked on his. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were a man of vision, a man destined for greatness. I saw fire in you that the world had not yet recognized. I am so honored to be the woman who can finally give you the platform you deserve, to be the wind beneath your wings, and to build a life with you that is as beautiful and as grand as your art. I promise to be your partner, your champion, and your muse, forever and ever." The subtext was as subtle as a sledgehammer. "I am the one who recognizes your greatness. I am the one giving you the platform." It was a vow not to a partner, but to a project. Then it was Preston's turn. He cleared his throat, pulling a small card from his pocket, though he barely glanced at it. His words were for Bianca, but his eyes kept flicking almost involuntarily towards the back of the room where Audrina sat. "Bianca," he said, his voice thick with performative emotion, "I feel like my whole life was in black and white before you. I was walking through a fog trying to create art with a muted palette. I didn't know what was missing, but I knew I was constrained, held back. You came into my life like a burst of color, a vibrant, brilliant light. You showed me what was possible when you have a partner who truly believes in your dream and isn't afraid of success. You've unlocked my potential. With you, I'm not just an artist. I'm a force. You have saved me from a life of quiet mediocrity, and for that I will love you and cherish you for all of my days." The venom was exquisitely aimed. Every word was a poisoned dart meant for Audrina. Muted palette, constrained, held back, quiet mediocrity. He was recasting their entire life together as her fault, a gray prison from which Bianca had liberated him. He was publicly shaming Audrina for the very qualities he had once claimed to love: her quiet nature, her simple life, her lack of interest in the glitzy world he now so desperately craved. A single hot tear slid down Audrina's cheek. It wasn't a tear of heartbreak for him. It was a tear of anger for the woman she had been, the woman who had absorbed those insults for years and believed on some level that they were true. It was a tear of mourning for her own lost self-worth. She wiped it away quickly and discreetly. No one would see her cry. Not here. Not today. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of I do's and a theatrical kiss that drew loud applause from the audience. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, beaming and waving, Preston's eyes found Audrina one last time. He gave her a small, tight smile, a final look of triumph. "See," the look said. "This is what I am. This is what you lost." But as Audrina met his gaze, she felt a profound shift inside her. The last vestiges of pain and self-doubt were burning away, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. He hadn't seen her. He had never seen her. He had looked right at her for 5 years and had seen only a reflection of his own inadequacies. He hadn't lost anything because he never had her in the first place. He had possessed a shadow, a carefully constructed persona. And he had no idea what was waiting for him when the real Audrina finally decided to step into the light. The reception, she knew, was going to be a night to remember. The reception was held in the castle's main ballroom, a cavernous space with a gold-leaf ceiling, towering arched windows, and a marble floor polished to a mirror shine. The opulence was nauseating. A 10-piece band was playing swing music and the champagne was flowing like water. Audrina found her assigned table, and to no one's surprise, it was in the farthest, darkest corner of the room, next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Table 23. It was filled with a smattering of Bianca's distant cousins and a few of Preston's old art school acquaintances who looked just as uncomfortable as she felt. social Siberia. She politely endured the dinner, pushing a piece of Chilean sea bass around her plate and making small talk with a dental hygienist from Buffalo. All the while she watched the head table. Preston and Bianca were the king and queen of their own gaudy prom, laughing, kissing for the cameras, soaking in the adoration of their court. After the main course, the clinking of a spoon against a glass signaled the start of the speeches. Bianca's father went first, delivering a rambling, tearful tribute to his princess. Then came Preston's best man, a slick real estate broker named Todd, who had always treated Audrina with a sneering condescension. Todd took the microphone, a little unsteady from the champagne. "I've known Preston for a long time," he began, "and I've seen him through thick and thin. Mostly thin, if you know what I mean. A few scattered laughs. I saw him trying to create his masterpieces, trying to find his way. And for a while there he was. Let's just say he was painting with watercolors. Nice, quiet, faded little pictures." He paused, letting the insult hang in the air. Everyone who knew Audrina understood the reference. But then he met Bianca. And suddenly the man is working in vibrant, bold oils. His life is a masterpiece in progress. "Bianca, you didn't just marry a great artist, you saved one. Let's raise a glass to the happy couple." The room erupted in applause. Audrina felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral, even clapping politely along with everyone else. Her composure was a fortress, and she would not let them see it crumble. But the main event was yet to come. After the best man's speech, Bianca stood up, took the microphone, and beamed at the crowd. "Thank you all so much for being here," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine emotion. "This is the happiest day of my life. I have my handsome, brilliant husband, my wonderful family, and all my amazing friends." Her eyes scanned the room, and then with theatrical precision, they landed on Audrina. Her smile widened. "And I have to give a special thank you to someone for being here tonight. Someone whose presence is the ultimate symbol of moving on. Audrina Shaw." A hush fell over the ballroom. All heads swiveled towards table 23. This was it. The public execution. "Audrina, would you stand up for a moment? Please don't be shy." Audrina's blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear. But she didn't. Slowly, deliberately, she rose to her feet. The spotlight that had been on the head table swung and found her, pinning her in its harsh white glare. She felt like an animal caught in the headlights. "There she is," Bianca cooed into the microphone. "When Preston and I decided to get married, we knew we had to invite Audrina. Because our story, our love story, is built on the foundations of the past. It's important to acknowledge that. And Audrina was such an important part of Preston's early phase. The condescension was palpable. I know that since the divorce things have been different for you," Bianca continued, her voice now a symphony of fake sympathy. "A simpler life, a more modest existence. And we want you to know that we wish you nothing but the best. We're all winners here tonight." She gestured to a waiter who brought a small, beautifully wrapped gift box to the stage. "And because we feel so blessed, we wanted to give you a little something. A gesture. A wedding favor just for you, to help you on your new path." Bianca took the box, walked off the stage, and glided through the tables until she stood directly in front of Audrina. The silence in the room was absolute. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on them. With a flourish, Bianca handed the box to Audrina. "Go on," she whispered loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Open it." Audrina's hands were shaking, but she opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was not a piece of jewelry or a keepsake. It was a gift card, a $50 gift card to Marshall's, the discount department store. And tucked beside it was a bus pass for the New York City MTA. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of snickers and horrified whispers. It was an act of such calculated, breathtaking cruelty that even some of the more jaded guests looked uncomfortable. They had gifted her bus fare and a voucher for a bargain bin, a public declaration of her lowly status. Bianca leaned in close, her breath smelling of champagne and malice. "Now you can buy yourself a new dress for the next time you get an invitation you can't afford," she hissed, just for Audrina to hear. Preston watched from the head table, a smug, triumphant grin plastered on his face. This was his masterpiece, the ultimate humiliation of the woman who had failed to be enough for him. Audrina looked down at the gift card, then up at Bianca's sneering face. She looked at Preston, enthroned at the head table. She saw the pity, the scorn, the amusement on the faces around her. She was completely, utterly alone, stranded on an island of public shame. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They were waiting for her to burst into tears, to scream, to throw the box in Bianca's face, to run from the room in disgrace. She did none of those things. She took a slow, deep breath. She closed the box gently. And then she looked directly at Bianca and smiled. It was not a pained smile or a weak smile. It was a small, calm, and utterly terrifying smile. "Thank you, Bianca." Audrina said, her voice perfectly even and clear, though it carried a new steely resonance. "This is very thoughtful, but I think you and Preston may have overlooked a small detail in your party planning." Before Bianca could respond, a commotion started at the main entrance of the ballroom. The grand double doors swung open, not with a gentle push from a waiter, but with a decisive, authoritative force. The swing band faltered, the music dying in a confused squawk of a saxophone. Two men, impossibly large and dressed in identical severe black suits with earpieces, stepped into the room. They moved with the disciplined precision of Secret Service agents, their eyes scanning the crowd with a cold professional indifference. They flanked the entrance, creating a path, and into that path walked a man who changed the entire atmosphere of the room. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a bespoke Savile Row suit that probably cost more than the entire wedding catering budget. He walked with a heavy silver-topped cane, but it was not a sign of weakness. It was a scepter. His presence radiated a power so immense and so old that it made the new money flashiness of the Vanderbilts and Montgomerys look like a child's tea party. He ignored the stunned bride and groom. He ignored the gawking guests. His cold blue eyes swept the room until they found the lone woman standing in the spotlight in the corner. He walked directly towards her, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. He stopped in front of Audrina, his severe expression softening just a fraction. "Ms. Kensington," said Jonathan Davenport, Chief Legal Counsel for Kensington Global Industries. "I apologize for the delay. The helicopter had to be rerouted. Are you ready to leave?" The name hung in the air, a sonic boom that shattered the reality of everyone present. Kensington, not Shaw. Kensington, as in Cormac Kensington, the reclusive, legendary multi-billionaire tycoon. The kingmaker. The man who owned half of Manhattan. Audrina looked from Mr. Davenport's unwavering gaze to the utter slack-jawed shock on Bianca's face. She held up the small gift box. Almost, she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "First, I believe I have a wedding gift to present in return." The silence in the ballroom was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum. Sound itself seemed too terrified to enter the space. Everyone was frozen, processing the name that had just been dropped like a bomb: Kensington. Preston Vanderbilt looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face, moments ago so smug and triumphant, had gone a sickly pale white. He half rose from his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. Bianca was similarly paralyzed, her perfectly made-up face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Jonathan Davenport, a man whose very presence made CEOs and politicians tremble, stood deferentially beside Audrina, waiting. He carried a slim, expensive-looking leather attaché case. He glanced at Bianca and the pathetic gift box in Audrina's hand, his expression one of utter contempt. "Ms. Kensington," he prompted gently, his voice a low rumble that still managed to fill the entire hall. Audrina turned her full attention back to Bianca. The meek, wounded woman from moments ago was gone. In her place stood someone with an aura of unshakable power. Her posture was different, ramrod straight. Her eyes, which had been downcast and sad, were now sharp and piercing. She had not changed her dress or her hair, But she was an entirely different person. She was no longer Audrina Shaw, the librarian. She was Audrina Kensington, and she was in command. Bianca Audrina said, her voice cool and measured. You said your love story was built on the foundations of the past. It's a very astute observation. More astute than you know. Preston was always very interested in foundations, in connections, in having a partner who could provide a platform. She took a step closer, and Bianca instinctively took a step back, as if Audrina were suddenly radiating an intense heat. For 5 years I paid for his studio. I bought his canvases. I funded the life he claimed to despise while he accused me of having no ambition of being from nothing. He wanted a partner with a name, with a family that could open doors. He looked at me every day and saw a dead end. Her gaze shifted from Bianca and swept across the room, finally landing on Preston, pinning him to his seat. You wanted color in your life, Preston. You wanted out of the quiet mediocrity. You hunted for wealth and status like a starving dog. The funny thing is, you had it all in your hands the entire time. You were just too blind and too arrogant to see it. She turned back to Mr. Davenport. Jonathan, if you would. With a crisp nod, Mr. Davenport placed his attaché case on the now empty table next to them. He snapped it open with 2 sharp clicks. The sound echoed like gunshots in the silent room. He didn't produce a weapon or a wad of cash. He produced a single thick folder made of stiff, formal-looking blue paper. He handed it not to Audrina, but directly to Preston, who was now stumbling toward them from the head table, his face a mess of confusion and terror. A wedding gift, Mr. Davenport announced in a voice that brooked no argument from Ms. Audrina Kensington. Preston's hands trembled as he took the folder. He fumbled with the clasp, his eyes darting wildly between Audrina and the impassive face of Mr. Davenport. He finally pulled out the sheaf of papers. The guests, now on their feet and craning their necks, could see the letterhead even from a distance. It belonged to one of the most powerful and ruthless law firms in New York City. What is this? Preston stammered. I believe the first document you're holding, Mr. Davenport explained calmly, is a default notice. For the $250,000 business loan you took out last year to fund your new gallery space. The one Bianca's father so generously co-signed. Bianca's father, Robert Montgomery, sputtered from the head table. That loan is in good standing. The first payment isn't due for another 6 months. It was in good standing, Mr. Davenport corrected smoothly, until approximately 1 hour ago. You see, the loan was issued by a smaller private investment bank, Sterling Finch. As of 4:00 p.m. yesterday, Sterling Finch was acquired in a private all-cash transaction by a subsidiary holding of Kensington Global Industries. As the new owners, we are exercising our contractual right to call in all outstanding debts deemed to be at high risk. And we deem Mr. Vanderbilt to be a very high risk. Preston's face went from white to a ghastly shade of green. You can't do that. Oh, but we can. And we have. The full amount plus interest and penalties is due Monday morning at 9:00 a.m. If you fail to pay, we will of course begin asset seizure proceedings immediately, starting with your charming new gallery. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. This was no longer just a personal drama, it was a financial execution. But that's not all, Audrina said, her voice cutting through the noise. Keep reading, Preston. His shaking hands sifted to the next document. It was a property deed. You'll recognize that address, Audrina continued. It's the building in Chelsea where your studio is. When you signed the lease, you told the landlord I was your wife, and that my non-existent family had assets that could guarantee the rent. You forged my signature on the guarantee forms. A little bit of fraud to get your foot in the door. I found out about it during the divorce, but decided not to press charges. I thought it was pathetic but harmless. She paused, letting the weight of his crime settle in the air. However, my grandfather, he feels differently about fraud. The Kensington Real Estate Division bought that building 6 months ago. Your lease is hereby terminated effective immediately for breach of contract and fraudulent representation. The men standing at the door are not just here for my security. They are here to escort you from the premises after your party is over. Your belongings have already been boxed up and will be delivered to your new mother-in-law's residence." Now it was Bianca's turn to look physically ill. Her dream husband was not just a broke artist. He was a fraud, and he was being evicted on their wedding night. But Audrina wasn't finished. She saved the most devastating blow for last. And finally she said, her voice softening into an almost gentle tone which was somehow more chilling. "This beautiful wedding, this castle, the flowers, the 10-piece band, the catering, the champagne you've all been enjoying so much." She gestured around the magnificent ballroom. Oheka Castle is one of several luxury event venues managed by the Elysian Group, a hospitality portfolio. My grandfather acquired the Elysian Group 3 years ago. When Bianca's father called to book this venue and your names were mentioned, my grandfather's office was flagged immediately. We have been aware of this event for months. She looked directly at Robert Montgomery, whose face had crumpled in defeat. "All the invoices, Mr. Montgomery, the ones you thought were being paid from your accounts, they were rerouted. All of them. The deposits you paid were refunded to your bank this afternoon. Every single bill for the venue, the food, the orchestra, the staff, the security has been consolidated. Mr. Davenport has the final invoice right here." Mr. Davenport reached into the attaché case and produced a second document, a single terrifyingly long page. He handed it to the shell-shocked Preston. "The total comes to $487,652.14, Mr. Davenport announced with grim satisfaction. "Payable to Kensington Global. We find it only fair that you should be responsible for the cost of your own triumph, Mr. Vanderbilt. As a wedding gift, Ms. Kensington has instructed me not to charge interest for the first 24 hours. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. In the space of 5 minutes, Audrina had gone from the humiliated ex-wife to the architect of their complete and total annihilation. Preston Vanderbilt and his new bride were not just embarrassed. They were financially and socially ruined, saddled with over $750,000 in immediate debt, with no gallery, no studio, and a future built on nothing but lies. Audrina looked at the wreckage of their perfect day. She looked at Preston, who was staring at the invoice as if it were his own death sentence. She looked at Bianca, whose fairy tale wedding had just become a nightmare from which she would never wake. And for the first time all night, Audrina Kensington allowed herself a genuine, satisfied smile. The ballroom was a tableau of shock. Guests stood like statues, champagne glasses, half-raised canapes, forgotten on their plates. The only movement was Preston's chest heaving in ragged, panicked breaths as he stared at the papers in his hand, the proof of his life's utter implosion. Bianca had sunk into a nearby chair, her Vera Wang dress pooling around her like a shroud. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and broken dreams. Audrina surveyed the scene not with glee, but with a quiet final sense of closure. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the narrative. For years, Preston had written her story, casting her as the meek, ambitionless, disposable character. Tonight she had ripped up his manuscript and published her own. She turned to leave, her point made, her power asserted. But Preston finally snapped out of his stupor. "Audrina, wait," he croaked, stumbling toward her. His face was a desperate, pleading mask. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw terror of a man who had just lost everything. "You can't do this. Audrina, please. I didn't know. I swear I never knew." Audrina stopped and turned to face him one last time. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no love, no pity. Just a vast, empty space where her feelings for him used to be. "That's the point, Preston," she said, her voice soft but unforgiving. "You never knew. You never once asked about my past, about my family, about who I really was. You didn't want a person. You wanted a prop. And when the prop didn't suit your ambitions, you threw it away. I loved you." He cried a pathetic, transparent lie. "We can fix this. I'll leave her. We can go back." A short, sharp laugh escaped Audrina's lips. It was a sound no one in the room had ever heard from her before. It was the sound of freedom. Go back. There's nothing to go back to. The woman you were married to doesn't exist anymore. You saw to that. You should be grateful. She gestured towards the weeping Bianca. You said it yourself in your vows. She saved you from a life of quiet mediocrity. Now you can build your beautiful grand life together. Starting from a negative balance of about $800,000. Good luck with your Zurich art show. With that final devastating cut, she turned her back on him for good. Jonathan, she said, her voice ringing with authority. Let's go. I have a board meeting in Geneva on Monday, and I'd like to get some rest. Mr. Davenport nodded. The helicopter is waiting at the East Hampton airfield, Ms. Kensington. The car is out front. As they walked toward the grand doors, the crowd parted for them as if they were royalty. The whispers were different now. They were not whispers of pity, but of awe and terror. They were witnessing the public birth of a new power player and the spectacular death of a social climber. As she passed the head table, her eyes briefly met those of Genevieve Vanderbilt. Preston's mother looked as if she had aged 30 years in the last 10 minutes. Her face was slack with horror, the gold sequins of her dress looking cheap and garish in the suddenly harsh light. Audrina and Mr. Davenport swept out of the ballroom, leaving a crater of social and financial ruin in their wake. The two large security men fell into step behind them, escorting them through the now silent halls of the castle. Outside, the cool night air was a relief. A black, gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom was purring silently at the bottom of the grand steps, a chauffeur holding the door open. This was a different world from the Queen's Walk-Up and the Long Island Railroad. It was the world she had been born into, and the world she was now ready to command. As she settled into the plush leather of the back seat, Mr. Davenport handed her a sleek satellite phone. Your grandfather is on the line, ma'am. Audrina took the phone. Hello, grandfather. Cormac Kensington's gruff voice filled the receiver, but it was laced with a warmth she hadn't heard in years. Jonathan tells me the party was a success. You could say that Audrina replied, a small smile playing on her lips as she watched the turrets of Ohika Castle recede in the distance. Good, Cormac said. It is one thing to have power, Audrina. It is another thing entirely to know how and when to use it. You did not use a sledgehammer. You used a scalpel. You have your grandmother's precision. I'm proud of you. Those words, I'm proud of you, meant more to her than all the billions in his bank accounts. They were the validation she had secretly craved her entire life. The estrangement between them had been born from her desire to live a normal life, and his fury at her for wasting her potential on a man like Preston. He had been right about Preston, but she had needed to learn that lesson on her own. I'm sorry, grandfather, she said, her voice catching slightly, for the lost time, for being so stubborn. Nonsense, he barked, though without his usual anger. The Kensington blood is stubborn. You've returned. That's all that matters. Now about that Geneva board meeting. I've had them clear my schedule. I'll be joining you. There are a few wolves on the board who need to be reminded who runs the company. It's time they met the new alpha. A sense of purpose, clean and bright, washed over Audrina. She wasn't just an heiress anymore. She wasn't just a victim who had gotten her revenge. She was stepping into her legacy. The years of living as Audrina Shaw, the quiet librarian, had not been a waste. They had taught her empathy. They had taught her what it was like to be invisible, to be underestimated. They had forged a core of steel beneath her quiet exterior. Preston had thought he was marrying a simple blank canvas, but he had unknowingly been living with a queen in exile. As the car sped through the night towards the waiting helicopter, Audrina looked out at the lights of Long Island. She had walked into that wedding as a ghost from the past. She was leaving as the architect of the future. Her future. And it was going to be brilliant. The Gulfstream G700 cut through the night sky, a vessel of silent power carrying Audrina from the ashes of her old life toward her future. The chaos of the wedding already felt a world away. While news alerts on her tablet buzzed with the explosive fallout, the Vanderbilt-Montgomery Union, already a synonym for social and financial ruin, Audrina ignored them. Revenge had been a door she needed to close. She had no interest in lingering in the hallway. Instead, she spent the transatlantic flight devouring the financial reports for a board meeting in Geneva, her mind sharp-focused and hungry. Her grandfather, Cormac Kensington, met her in Geneva. Seeing him, she saw not just family, but the weight of a legacy she was now prepared to claim. He led her into a boardroom filled with skeptical, powerful men. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cormac announced, his voice echoing off the polished mahogany, "my granddaughter, Audrina Kensington, will be taking my seat on this board, effective today." A German industrialist, Klaus von Hesse, scoffed. "With all due respect, Cormac, what experience does she bring?" Audrina stepped forward before her grandfather could speak. Her voice was calm and cut through the tension like a razor. "Mr. von Hesse," she began, meeting his condescending gaze without blinking. "Your proposed acquisition of Moreau DuPont is overvalued by at least 18%. Your projections ignore the upcoming union strikes in France and the volatility of lithium prices impacting their fleet. Your plan is a liability. My counter-proposal, which is already on your tablets, outlines a path to acquiring them at a realistic valuation, after they are weakened by the strikes, saving this company nearly $1 billion. The boardroom was stunned into silence. In one sharp, data-driven strike, she had dismantled a senior member's strategy and asserted her dominance. Cormac Kensington leaned back, a proud, wolfish grin spreading across his face. The Queen had arrived. That day set the tone for her new life. Audrina's leadership was transformative. The quiet librarian who had observed the world from the sidelines became a CEO who saw everything. She led Kensington Global into a new era of sustainable technology and ethical innovation, her empire growing far beyond what her grandfather had built. She never saw Preston or Bianca again, though their story became a cautionary tale whispered in the Hamptons. Ruined and drowning in debt, their sham marriage dissolved within a year, leaving them as footnotes in the story of her rise. Sometimes late at night in her office overlooking the glittering city, Audrina would think of the woman in the simple gray dress, standing alone under a spotlight of humiliation. She didn't pity her, she respected her. That woman's quiet endurance had forged the steel in her own spine. Preston's greatest mistake was never seeing the Queen in his midst. That blindness cost him everything, and in turn it gave her an empire. What a journey of deception, humiliation, and ultimate world-shaking vindication. Audrina's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most formidable strength, and that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. It's a tale where the underdog didn't just win. She rewrote the entire game, proving that true power isn't about the name you carry or the money you have, but about the unshakable character you build when no one is watching. What would you have done if you were in Audrina's shoes? Would you have walked away, or would you have unleashed the storm? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of epic revenge and empowerment, please hit that like button, share this video with friends who love a triumphant ending, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible true-life dramas that will leave you breathless.
The air at the Sterling-Rossi wedding tasted of money, old new, and oceans of it. Lilies imported from Dutch glasshouses fought a losing battle against the cloying scent of 1,000 competing perfumes. Isabella Rossi, 7 months pregnant and radiant, in a gown that cost more than a suburban house, felt a single cold drop of sweat trace its way down her spine. Her fiancé, Richard Sterling, the man who was supposed to be waiting for her at the end of the aisle, was missing, and in the pit of her stomach, where their child kicked softly, a primal instinct screamed that this was no simple case of cold feet. She was about to discover a betrayal so profound it would not only shatter her heart, but threaten to bring 2 corporate empires crashing to the ground. The union of Isabella Rossi and Richard Sterling was less a romance and more a coronation. It was the merger of 2 dynasties, a meticulously planned corporate maneuver, wrapped in the fairy tale trappings of a high society wedding. The Rossis, with Isabella at the helm of their marketing division, commanded a global luxury goods empire. Rossi lifestyle, built on Italian craftsmanship and timeless elegance. The Sterlings, a colder, sharper dynasty of American finance, were led by Richard's formidable mother, Victoria Sterling. Their firm, Sterling Holdings, had its tendrils in every corner of the global market. The marriage was the final seal on a multi-billion-dollar merger agreement, a pact that would create a conglomerate of unparalleled power, Sterling Rossi Global. To the outside world, Isabella and Richard were the perfect couple. She was the warm, creative heart. He was the charming, ambitious face of new money. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of paparazzi flashes, charity galas, and weekend trips to Monaco on the Sterling private jet. Richard had courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that left gossip columnists breathless. He'd once filled her Milan apartment with 1,000 white orchids, her favorite simply because she'd had a stressful week. He'd written her name in the sky over the Hamptons. He was attentive, devoted, and seemed utterly captivated by her. But a gilded cage is still a cage. Isabella's brother, Leo Rossi, never trusted him. Leo, 2 years her senior, was the stoic, watchful CEO of the Rossi empire. He had the soul of an old-world craftsman and the mind of a shark. "He performs for you, Bella," he'd told her a month before the wedding, his voice low and serious over a glass of Barolo in his study. "No one is that perfect. He's playing a role, and you need to figure out what his script is." Isabella had dismissed it as brotherly overprotectiveness. "You see everyone as a business opponent, Leo. He loves me, and I love him." Her love was genuine. She saw past the polished Sterling veneer to a man she believed was simply trying to live up to the impossible expectations of his mother. Victoria Sterling was a woman carved from ice and ambition. She viewed emotion as a liability and affection as a currency to be dispensed sparingly and strategically. She approved of Isabella not as a daughter-in-law, but as a priceless asset. The pregnancy, which they had announced 3 months prior, had only increased Isabella's value in Victoria's cold calculus. A male heir would solidify the dynasty. The wedding preparations had been a military-grade operation orchestrated by Victoria. The venue was a historic Long Island estate, its sprawling lawns rolling down to the calm, grey waters of the Sound. The guest list was a who's who of global finance, European aristocracy, and Hollywood royalty. Every detail was curated to scream power. The champagne was vintage, the orchestra was from Vienna, and the 5-tier wedding cake was a confectionery marvel flown in from Paris. The week leading up to the ceremony had been a blur of contractual meetings disguised as family dinners. Lawyers outnumbered cousins. The talk was of stock options, board seats, and brand synergy. Richard, usually so attentive, had become distant, his phone a permanent fixture in his hand. He'd wave away her concerns with a dazzling smile. "Just last-minute merger madness, my love. The price of building our empire. After Saturday, it's just you, me, and the little one. I promise." He had a best man, Marcus Thorne, who was also a senior VP at Sterling Holdings. Marcus was slick and obsequious, always laughing a little too loudly at Richard's jokes, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Isabella found him unnerving. He had a way of looking at her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Resentment, perhaps, or a predatory hunger that was deeply unsettling. She'd mentioned it to Richard once, who had simply laughed it off. "Marcus, he's harmless, a bit of a suck-up, but he's been my right hand for years. Don't you worry your beautiful head about him." On the morning of the wedding, the bride's suite at the estate was a flurry of activity. Her mother, Sophia Rossi, a woman whose warmth was a direct contrast to Victoria's frost, was fussing with the lace on her veil. Her bridesmaids, a giggling trio of her oldest friends from university, were sipping champagne. But Isabella couldn't shake a deep, gnawing anxiety. She hadn't seen Richard that morning. He had stayed at a nearby hotel with Marcus, as per tradition, but he had promised to come to her suite for a private moment before the chaos began, just the two of them. He was an hour late. She'd called him twice. The first time it went straight to voicemail. The second time he'd answered his voice breathless and rushed. "Sorry, darling. Got held up. Marcus needed me for something. A little best man crisis. I'm on my way now. I love you." But there was a noise in the background, a faint feminine giggle. Before she could ask, he'd hung up. "Everything all right, Cara?" her mother asked, her gentle hands stilling on her shoulders. Isabella forced a smile. "Fine, Mama. Just nerves." But it wasn't nerves. It was a splinter of doubt lodged deep in her heart that was beginning to fester. She walked to the grand window of the suite, which overlooked the perfectly manicured gardens where hundreds of guests were already beginning to gather. She saw Victoria Sterling holding court near the grand floral arch, a triumphant queen surveying her kingdom. She saw Leo standing apart, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight as he stared toward the main house. Their child chose that moment to give a strong, decisive kick. Isabella placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise running through her. "I will protect you, always." The words were a vow, though she did not yet know the war she was about to declare. The drop of sweat completed its journey down her back, and the fairy tale began to curdle. The stage was set, the audience was waiting, but the leading man had gone off script, and Isabella was about to become the director of an entirely different kind of show. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each one taut with an unspoken tension that began to suffocate the joyous atmosphere of the bride's suite. The laughter of her bridesmaids became forced. The bubbles in their champagne seemed to die with a fizz of anxiety. Isabella's phone remained silent on the antique vanity, a sleek black mirror reflecting her perfectly made-up face, a mask of serene beauty that was beginning to crack at the edges. "He'll be here," her friend Jessica said, a little too brightly. "You know what grooms are like. Probably lost his cufflinks or something." But Isabella knew Richard. He was meticulously organized, a trait hammered into him by his mother. He didn't lose things. He didn't run late for appointments of this magnitude, not unless he was distracted. The wedding planner, a severe woman named Ms. Albright with a headset permanently attached to her ear, appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Ms. Rossi. Your father is waiting downstairs. The guests are seated." Her eyes darted around the room, noting the absence of the groom. A flicker of professional panic crossed her face before being ruthlessly suppressed. "He was supposed to be here," Isabella said, her voice quiet. "I'm sure he's on his way to the altar." Ms. Albright chirped, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Shall we?" Isabella took a deep breath, the boning of her custom-made gown feeling suddenly like a straitjacket. "I need a moment. Please. Just tell my father 2 more minutes." As soon as the door clicked shut, she looked at her brother's number and pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "Where is he, Leo?" she asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Leo's voice was grim. "I don't know. Marcus is out there by the archway, looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. He told me Richard was composing himself." Victoria is starting to look murderous, and not in her usual way. A new wave of nausea washed over her, this one having nothing to do with her pregnancy. Leo, he called an hour ago. He said he was with Marcus. I heard a girl laugh. Silence on the other end of the line. When Leo finally spoke, all traces of forced calm were gone. His voice was cold steel. "Where are you, Bella?" "In the suite. They want me to start walking." "Don't move," he commanded. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming up. Something is wrong." The call ended. Isabella stood frozen in the middle of the opulent room. Her friends watched her, their earlier cheerfulness replaced by a shared silent dread. The scent of lilies was now overwhelming funereal. It was the scent of decay. She had to know. "I need some air," she announced, her voice surprisingly steady. She began walking toward the door, her heavy train whispering behind her. "Bella, wait," her mother cried out. "Your dress, you can't go out there." But Isabella didn't stop. She moved with a purpose that scattered her entourage like birds. She swept past Ms. Albright in the hallway, ignoring her frantic protests. She ignored the confused looks from caterers and staff. Her instincts were a roaring fire in her gut, guiding her steps, pulling her not towards the garden, not towards the ceremony, but in the opposite direction, down a secluded corridor that led to the estate's private wing. The library, the billiards room, and a series of small private studies reserved for the estate's owners. It was a part of the house the guests were not meant to see. The air here was still and cool. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps. She passed the grand library, its doors firmly shut. She passed the billiards room. And then she saw it. At the end of the hall, the door to the smallest study, the one with the old mahogany desk and the view of the secluded woods, was slightly ajar. A sliver of light cut across the dark hallway, and from within she heard a sound that would be seared into her memory forever. It wasn't a giggle this time. It was a soft, breathy moan. Her blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her hand, clutching the bouquet of white peonies and roses, began to tremble violently. The baby inside her was still, as if sensing the impending shockwave. This was a dream, a nightmare. It had to be. In a moment, she would wake up in her bed, and Richard would be there, and this horrible, suffocating feeling would be gone. Then she heard his voice, low and husky, a voice she knew better than her own. "We don't have much time." He said his words punctuated by another soft, feminine sound. Anger, white hot and volcanic, erupted through the ice of her shock. It propelled her forward. Her trembling stopped. Her hand was steady. She didn't throw the door open. She pushed it slowly, silently. The scene that greeted her was a tableau of obscene betrayal. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss. It was far, far worse. Richard, her Richard, was there, his perfectly tailored wedding tuxedo jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck, and his shirt was unbuttoned, revealing his chest. He was leaning against the large mahogany desk, and in his arms, her body pressed against his, was a woman. Isabella recognized her instantly. It was Scarlett Dubois, a junior analyst from Sterling Holdings, a pretty brunette with ambitious eyes whom Richard had once dismissed as eager but harmless. Scarlett's dress, a slinky emerald green number completely inappropriate for a morning wedding, was hiked up high on her thighs. Her hands were tangled in Richard's hair. Her lipstick, a garish shade of crimson, was smeared around her mouth. and on the desk, next to a half-empty glass of what looked like whiskey, sat Richard's phone. They hadn't seen her. They were lost in their sordid little world, just meters away from where their families, their friends, their entire world awaited their union. Isabella didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm washed over her. It was the calm of the eye of a hurricane, a pocket of absolute stillness before total devastation. She took one step into the room. The heel of her shoe clicked on the hardwood floor just inside the doorway. It was the only sound needed. Richard's head snapped up. His eyes widened first in confusion, then in pure, unadulterated horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pasty and sick. He shoved Scarlett away from him so abruptly that she stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Bella." He choked out his voice, a strangled whisper. It's not what it looks like." It was the oldest, most pathetic cliché in the book, and it was the spark that lit the fuse. Isabella looked from his panicked face to Scarlett's, who was now staring at her with a mixture of fear and defiance. She looked at his undone shirt, at the smeared lipstick, at the jacket, lying discarded like a promise he'd just thrown away. Then her gaze fell to the phone on the desk. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked away. "Bella, wait. Please." Richard's desperate cry followed her down the hall. She heard him scrambling, fumbling to fix his clothes to chase after her. But just as he reached the hallway, another figure appeared, blocking his path. It was Leo. His face was a mask of thunderous rage. He had seen her face as she emerged from the corridor, and he had understood everything in an instant. "You are not taking one more step toward my sister." Leo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He placed a firm hand on Richard's chest, stopping him cold. Isabella didn't look back. She kept walking her back straight, her head held high. She walked past the confused staff, past Ms. Albright, who was now babbling into her headset. She walked to the grand staircase where her father, a kind man with a gentle face, was waiting for her, his expression a mixture of pride and confusion. "Isabella, what's wrong? Where have you been?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She looked at her father, the man who had always protected her, and for the first time a single tear escaped and traced a path through her perfect makeup. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "The wedding is off," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the air. She didn't wait for his response. She lifted the microphone from the small podium that had been set up for the officiant. Her hand was rock steady. She walked past the stunned string quartet, past the floral arch, and stood before the hundreds of seated guests. The murmuring crowd fell silent, their faces a sea of confusion. They saw a bride impossibly beautiful standing alone at the altar. They expected a tearful announcement of a delay. They expected an apology. They got a revolution. The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. It was a heavy, breathless void, filled only by the distant cry of a seagull and the rustle of leaves in the sea breeze. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on Isabella, a solitary figure in white against a backdrop of obscene floral abundance. In the front row, Victoria Sterling's face had tightened into a mask of confused displeasure. She started to rise, a silent command for Isabella to step down, but a sharp look from Leo, who had now taken a position a few feet to his sister's right, froze her in place. Isabella's knuckles were white where she gripped the microphone. She could feel the baby, a tiny, innocent life, nestled safely inside her. That thought was her anchor. It was her strength. She wasn't just a jilted bride. She was a mother, protecting her child from a legacy of lies before it could even begin. She lifted the microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, did not tremble. It was clear, resonant, and carried the cold, hard weight of undeniable truth. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, deliberately avoiding Richard's family. "I want to thank you all for coming here today to celebrate what was meant to be a joyous occasion." A nervous titter went through the crowd. This was not the expected script. "I have a brief announcement to make," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "There will be no wedding today." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Phones previously tucked away out of politeness began to emerge from pockets and purses. Victoria Sterling was now fully on her feet, her face ashen, her eyes shooting daggers at Isabella. The union between the Rossi and Sterling families, and by extension the merger between our companies, is hereby cancelled, effective immediately. This was no longer a personal drama. It was a corporate bombshell. Murmurs erupted into a low roar. Men in tailored suits began speaking urgently into their phones. The stock market wasn't open on a Saturday, but they knew the bloodbath that would ensue on Monday morning. "Bella, stop this!" Victoria's voice was a sharp, piercing shriek that cut through the noise. "You are hysterical. What is the meaning of this?" Isabella finally turned her eyes to Victoria. There was no fear in her gaze, only a chilling, profound pity. "You should ask your son, Victoria," she said, her voice dropping yet still carrying across the amplified system. "You should ask him what he was doing just a few moments ago in the estate's private study." At that moment, Richard finally appeared at the edge of the garden, skidding to a halt on the manicured grass. He had managed to straighten his clothes, but his face was a wreck of sweat and panic. Marcus Thorne was beside him, whispering frantically in his ear. Scarlett was nowhere to be seen, having evidently made a swift and cowardly exit. "Bella, don't do this," Richard shouted, his voice cracking with desperation as he started to push his way through the stunned guests. "Let's talk about this in private." "In private?" Isabella laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. "You mean like you and your mistress were just minutes before you were supposed to pledge your life to me, to our child?" The word mistress hung in the air, an accusation so vulgar and direct, it shocked the refined crowd into another stunned silence. The word child was a second blow twisting the knife of betrayal. Everyone knew she was pregnant. The crime was now doubled a sin against both a wife and a mother. Her eyes found Richard in the crowd. He froze, his face a mess of guilt and terror. "I believe the woman's name is Scarlett Dubois," Isabella announced, her voice precise and unforgiving. "She's a junior analyst at Sterling Holdings. For those of you on the board, you might want to review your company's policies on fraternization, especially when it involves the CEO-to-be actively cheating on his pregnant fiancée during his own wedding." Every detail was a nail in the coffin. She wasn't just airing dirty laundry. She was meticulously documenting the crime for the whole world to see. She named the woman, her position, the company, the location, the timing. It was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Richard looked utterly broken, exposed. He looked to his mother for help, but Victoria was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He had not just embarrassed the family. He had single-handedly torpedoed her life's work, the merger in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. He had proven himself to be exactly what she feared most, a weak, foolish boy ruled by his basest impulses. Isabella's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her own family. Her father's face was a canvas of shock and dawning rage. Her mother was weeping silently. And Leo was looking at her with an expression of fierce, absolute pride. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I've got you." She turned back to the crowd. "I apologize for wasting your time," she said, her formal tone returning. "But I believe in transparency, and I will not begin a marriage, a family, or a business partnership based on a foundation of such profound disrespect and deceit." She placed the microphone carefully back on the stand. The silence was broken by the sound of her footsteps on the stone path as she walked back the way she came. It was the most powerful walk of her life. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. She moved with the grace and dignity of a queen abdicating a throne she had just discovered was made of filth. As she reached the archway, she unclasped the sterling diamond, the ridiculously large engagement ring Richard had given her. It felt cold and foreign on her finger. She held it out to Leo as he met her. "See that our lawyers get this back to them," she said, her voice a low murmur, "along with a bill for half of this catastrophe." Leo took the ring, his hand closing over it. "Consider it done." "What now?" "Now," Isabella said, taking her brother's arm and not looking back at the chaos erupting behind them. "We go home, and then we go to war." The fairy tale was over. The carefully constructed facade had been shattered into a million pieces. As the Rossi siblings disappeared into the house, leaving the Sterling Empire to implode in a garden of dying lilies, one thing was clear. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a drama that would make the cancelled wedding look like a minor skirmish in a much larger, more brutal conflict. The sleeping giant of the Rossi family had been awakened, and hell hath no fury like a billionaire heiress scorned. The drive from the Long Island estate back to Isabella's Manhattan penthouse was a study in surreal silence. Leo drove the black Maybach with a focused intensity, navigating the traffic as if it were a hostile battleground. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of the city, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The adrenaline of the confrontation had begun to fade, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache that settled in her bones. She wasn't crying. The betrayal felt too vast, too seismic for tears. It was a tectonic shift in the landscape of her life, and she was still surveying the wreckage. Her phone, which she'd left in the bridal suite, had been retrieved by Leo's security detail. When they finally entered the quiet, sun-drenched expanse of her penthouse overlooking Central Park, her head of security, a stoic ex-Mossad agent named Gabriel, handed it to her. "It hasn't stopped, Miss Rosie," he said, his voice impassive. "We've identified 37 unique numbers from the Sterling family and their associates, and over 200 calls from blocked numbers we assume are media." "Turn it off," Leo commanded. "Bella doesn't need to hear from any of them." "No," Isabella said, her voice surprisingly firm. She took the phone. "I want to see the groveling." She powered it on. The device vibrated violently in her hand as a tsunami of notifications flooded the screen. Voicemails, text messages, missed calls. Most were from Richard. She clicked on the most recent voicemail, putting it on speaker. Richard's voice, thick with manufactured tears and genuine panic, filled the room. "Bella. My God. Bella, I am so sorry. You don't understand. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. She means nothing to me. It was Marcus. He kept pouring me drinks, saying I was nervous. Scarlett was just there. I don't even know how it happened. Please just talk to me. We can fix this. I love you. I love our baby. Don't throw this all away. because of one moment of insanity. Isabella listened with a detached curiosity, as if studying a particularly loathsome insect under a microscope. He blames Marcus. He blames the alcohol. He calls her meaningless. He hasn't taken one shred of responsibility. She observed her voice, clinical. She deleted the voicemail without a second thought. The next was from Victoria. Her tone was not apologetic. It was furious. Isabella, you have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Whatever foolishness Richard engaged in it was a private matter. To detonate it publicly, to jeopardize a multi-billion-dollar merger out of pure emotional hysterics, is unforgivable. You have proven yourself to be exactly the kind of liability I feared. Call me back when you have decided to act like an adult and salvage this situation, not for Richard's sake, but for the sake of our shareholders. Leo let out a short, harsh laugh. She's worried about the shareholders, of course. Her son humiliates you in the worst possible way, and her first thought is the stock price. It's all she knows, Isabella said, deleting Victoria's message as well. She scrolled through the texts. Pathetic apologies from Richard. Demands from his father. Even a bizarrely threatening message from an unknown number that read, "You just made a very powerful enemy, you little bitch." She suspected it was Marcus Thorne. She tossed the phone onto the marble island in her kitchen. "Lawyers," she said to Leo, "get our legal team on a conference call. I want the merger dissolution papers drafted by Monday. I want a press release from Rossi Lifestyle by noon tomorrow, stating our position clearly. I want our PR team to get ahead of this narrative. I am not the hysterical woman. I am the CEO who uncovered a fatal flaw in a potential partner's leadership and acted decisively to protect my company's interests." Leo was already on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "Done. I'm calling Marco, then Julia from Pier. What about the personal side?" "Personal side," Isabella repeated the words as if they were from a foreign language. "There is no personal side anymore. He made it business when he cheated with a company employee. He made it business when he risked our family's name. Victoria made it business when she called me a liability to." The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated strategic warfare. While the Sterlings were in panicked damage control, fielding calls from irate board members and trying to spin a narrative of a troubled emotional bride, the Rossi team launched a surgical PR strike. Their press release was a masterpiece of corporate speak, framing the cancelled wedding and merger as a fundamental divergence in corporate ethics and leadership values discovered at a critical juncture. It never mentioned cheating, but the implication was clear. They were the stable, honorable party, extricating themselves from a toxic partner. The media, smelling blood, went into a frenzy. Paparazzi camped outside Isabella's building and the Sterling Holdings headquarters. Gossip sites published grainy photos of Scarlett Dubois fleeing the wedding venue, her face hidden in shame. Her identity, her job, her social media profiles, everything was dug up and put on public display. She became the digital Scarlet woman torn apart by an anonymous online mob. Isabella felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Scarlett's defiant smirk in that study. Meanwhile, Leo was dismantling the financial ties that had already begun to bind the two companies. He was ruthless. Joint accounts were frozen. Preliminary integration budgets were clawed back. A penalty clause in the initial merger agreement, one Leo himself had insisted upon covering, breaches of good faith and personal conduct by key principles was invoked. It would cost Sterling Holdings hundreds of millions of dollars. Isabella spent most of her time in her penthouse, a gilded fortress against the storm outside. Her mother Sophia had arrived, bringing with her the scent of home-cooked food and unconditional love. She didn't offer advice or judgment. She simply sat with Isabella, held her hand, and let her be silent when she needed silence and rage when she needed to rage. The rage came on the third day. Isabella was standing in the nursery she had so lovingly designed. It was a serene space of soft creams and gentle greys, with a hand-painted mural of a whimsical forest on one wall. A tiny crib stood assembled in the corner. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, and suddenly the full weight of her loss crashed down on her. It wasn't just the loss of a husband, but the loss of a dream of the family she thought she was building for her child. She let out a guttural sob, a sound of pure animal pain. And then she began to dismantle the room. She didn't break anything. Her actions were deliberate, methodical. She folded the tiny clothes and placed them back in their boxes. She took down the mobile of soft, felted stars. She pushed the crib against the wall. She was erasing Richard, erasing the future they were supposed to have, clearing the space for a new one she would have to build alone. Later that evening, Leo came to her apartment. He found her in the now barren nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the blank space where the crib had been. "The market's open today," he said, softly, leaning against the doorframe. Isabella didn't turn. "How bad was it?" "Worse than we thought." "For them," Leo clarified. Sterling Holdings dropped 17% at the opening bell. The financial press is calling it the Sterling implosion. Our stock, on the other hand, is up 3%. The narrative is holding we're seen as the strong, stable ones who dodged a bullet. A grim satisfaction settled over her. "Good. There's more," Leo said, his tone shifting. "Something's not right. The penalty clause I invoked. Sterling's lawyers are fighting it, which is expected. But their arguments are weak, almost distracted. And I've been looking at some of the preliminary financial data we shared during the due diligence phase. There are anomalies." This caught Isabella's attention. She turned to look at her brother. "What kind of anomalies?" "Small things. Discrepancies in growth projections for certain offshore assets. A few encrypted data packets that our tech team flagged as unusual during the transfer. At the time, we chalked it up to Sterling's sloppy data management. But now, I don't know. It feels different." He walked further into the room. "Think about it, Bella. The affair was stupid. It was arrogant. But the timing, on the morning of the wedding at the venue itself, it's almost too perfect, too self-destructive. Richard is weak and entitled, but is he suicidal?" A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through Isabella's grief. Leo was right. The sheer brazen stupidity of Richard's actions was hard to reconcile. It was a level of recklessness that bordered on the theatrical. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting," Leo said, his eyes narrowing, "that maybe the affair wasn't the main event. Maybe it was a distraction, a smokescreen designed to cause exactly this kind of chaos. The question is, what was it meant to hide? The world, which had just been shattered, shifted again. Isabella had thought she was at the center of a drama about love and betrayal, but the cold dread creeping into her heart suggested she had been a pawn in an entirely different game. One with stakes that might be far higher than a broken heart and a cancelled wedding. The unraveling, she realized, had only just begun. The seed of doubt Leo had planted grew into a thicket of suspicion in Isabella's mind. For the next 2 weeks, while the world feasted on the scraps of her personal drama, she and her brother initiated a covert operation. They assembled a small, trusted team, Marco their head of legal, Julia their PR chief, a forensic accountant named Anya Sharma, who had a reputation for finding needles in digital haystacks, and Gabriel, their head of security, who was tasked with digging into the lives of Richard Marcus Thorne and Scarlett Dubois. Isabella worked from her penthouse, which had been transformed into a war room. The large dining table was covered in laptops, financial reports, and timelines. The grief was still there, a constant, dull ache, but it was now overlaid with a cold, energizing fury. She had been played. Her pain, her humiliation, her child's future, it had all been collateral damage in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Now she wanted to know the rules, and she wanted to burn the whole game board to the ground. Anya Sharma struck first. "The anomalies Leo flagged are real," she announced during a late-night conference call, her voice crisp and excited. "During the due diligence data transfer, Sterling Holdings sent us several large encrypted archive files containing their projections and asset valuations. Standard procedure. But buried within 3 of those archives were ghost protocols, essentially hidden programs that ran in the background while our servers were analyzing the data." "What did the programs do?" Isabella asked, leaning forward, her coffee forgotten. "They didn't steal anything," Anya said. "That would have triggered alarms. They did something much smarter. They made micro-alterations to our own predictive models. Tiny, insignificant changes to algorithm variables that over time would have skewed our valuation of their assets, specifically their new tech and derivatives divisions, making them appear more stable and profitable than they actually were." Leo swore softly in Italian. "So they weren't just showing us fake numbers. They were hacking us to make us believe their fake numbers were our own idea." "Exactly," Anya confirmed. "It's brilliant and terrifyingly subtle. The financial discrepancy would have been a rounding error at first, but post-merger it would have become a black hole. Sterling Rossi Global would have been carrying billions in toxic, overvalued assets from their side of the ledger. Within a year or 2 it would have triggered a catastrophic devaluation." "A corporate Trojan horse," Isabella whispered, the pieces beginning to click into place. "Victoria would never sanction that. She's ruthless, but she's not stupid. A collapse like that would destroy the Sterling name forever." "Which means someone else at Sterling Holdings was running this play." Leo concluded, his voice grim. "Someone who stood to gain from the chaos." The spotlight fell squarely on 2 people, Richard and Marcus Thorne. At the same time, Gabriel's report landed on Isabella's desk. It was a deep dive into the lives of her ex-fiancé and his best man. Richard's profile was predictable, a history of lavish spending, a string of short-term relationships with models and actresses, and a deep-seated psychological need for his mother's approval. But Marcus Thorne's profile was far more interesting. On the surface, he was the loyal number 2. But Gabriel's team had dug deeper. Marcus came from a family that had been rivals with the Sterlings 2 generations ago, before his own family's fortune had collapsed. He had joined Sterling Holdings with a chip on his shoulder, working his way up while living in Richard's shadow. Gabriel had also uncovered a series of encrypted communications and offshore bank transfers. Marcus was living far beyond his declared salary, and the money trail led to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The final piece of the puzzle was Scarlett Dubois. Gabriel's team found that she wasn't just a random ambitious analyst. Her university tuition had been paid for by an anonymous scholarship fund. A fund that Gabriel, through painstaking digital forensics, traced back to the same Cayman Islands holding company that was financing Marcus Thorne. "He's been cultivating her for years," Isabella breathed, staring at the interconnected lines she had drawn on a whiteboard. "She was his asset. He placed her inside the company, probably instructed her to get close to Richard, knowing Richard's weakness for a pretty face and a bit of ego stroking. "It's a classic intelligence operation," Gabriel stated. "Thorn is the handler, Dubois is the honey trap." The full horrifying picture began to emerge. This was Marcus Thorn's endgame. He wasn't Richard's friend. He was his nemesis, playing a long, patient game of revenge and ambition. "So here's the play," Leo said, pacing the room, piecing it together. "Marcus plants the Trojan horse in the merger data. He knows it will eventually cripple the new company, but that's not enough. He wants to take over. He needs to discredit the Sterling leadership, namely Richard, and cause a crisis that sends the stock price plummeting." "The affair," Isabella finished, her voice laced with ice. "It was the perfect catalyst. He goads Richard, who is already a willing fool, into a situation he knows Richard can't resist. He makes sure it happens at the most public, most damaging time possible. He wanted me to find them. He wanted the public explosion. It wasn't just about stopping the merger. It was about cratering Sterling Holdings' value." "So he could trigger a hostile takeover," Anya added. "With the stock in freefall, the company would be vulnerable. He and his backers, whoever is behind that Cayman account, could swoop in and buy up a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. He gets his revenge on the Sterlings. He gets the company, and he gets to be the hero who rescues it from the ashes." Leo summarized, shaking his head in disbelief at the sheer Machiavellian audacity of the plan. It was all there. The cheating scandal wasn't the story. It was the cover. Isabella's public humiliation had been a meticulously planned strategic move in a corporate coup. The realization didn't lessen her pain, but it transformed it. The grief of a victim was replaced by the cold, calculating rage of a queen who had been used as a pawn in a commoner's coup. "Richard," Isabella said the name, testing it. "Where does he fit? Is he a total idiot, or was he a willing participant?" "I think he's a fool, not a conspirator," Leo reasoned. "Marcus likely sold him a different story. Sow some wild oats before you settle down. Have one last fling." He played on Richard's ego and insecurities. Richard thought he was just being a playboy. He had no idea he was the sacrificial lamb. Isabella stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. They seemed sharper now, colder. She had been betrayed on a level she could scarcely comprehend. Her heart had been broken to create a market opportunity. "They underestimated me," she said, softly, her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass. "They all did. Richard thought I was just a prize. Victoria thought I was an asset. And Marcus thought I was a hysterical woman who would just cry and cancel a wedding." She turned back to the room, her eyes burning with a new fire. "He's right about one thing. I did cancel the wedding. Now I'm going to cancel his entire future." She looked at Leo, at Anya, at Gabriel. "We have the proof of the financial fraud. We have the connection between Marcus and Scarlett. We have the motive. It's time to stop playing defense. It's time to show them what a Rossi does when you threaten our family and our house." The serpent had played his game, but he had made a fatal error. He had attacked the lioness in her own den, and he had forgotten that she had claws of her own. The war for Sterling Holdings was about to enter a new bloody chapter, and Isabella Rossi, the scorned bride, was about to become its unlikely conqueror. Isabella did not move with the speed of a woman seeking vengeance. She moved with the cold, deliberate precision of a master chess player setting up a checkmate. For a week, she did nothing, letting the public narrative solidify. Sterling Holdings continued its slow-motion collapse. The stock had stabilized but was still down almost 30% from its pre-wedding value. Board members were in open revolt, and Victoria Sterling was fighting a losing battle to maintain control her every move, hampered by the public disgrace of her son. Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, was playing his part perfectly. He was the picture of loyalty, publicly defending the Sterling family, while privately telling key investors and board members that Richard was an unstable liability, and Victoria had lost her touch. He was positioning himself as the only viable successor, the steady hand needed to guide the company through the storm he had created. The first move of Isabella's counterattack was silent and devastating. Through a neutral third-party law firm based in Geneva, Leo, acting on Isabella's instructions, forwarded Anya Sharma's entire forensic report on the Trojan Horse data breach to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. The report was submitted anonymously, flagged as a whistleblower complaint originating from within Sterling Holdings itself. It detailed the attempted fraud, the ghost protocols, and the potential for massive shareholder deception without once mentioning the Rossi family. 2 days later, federal agents walked into the Sterling Holdings headquarters in Midtown with a warrant. They seized servers, computers, and files. The raid made national news, sending a fresh shockwave of panic through the investment community. The stock, which had been limping, now nosedived into a catastrophic freefall. The narrative was no longer about a cheating fiancé. It was about systemic, high-level corporate fraud. Victoria and Richard were blindsided. They had been so focused on the personal scandal that they had no idea a financial guillotine was hanging over their heads. Isabella's second move was targeted at Marcus Thorne himself. While the federal investigation paralyzed the company, Gabriel delivered a dossier to her. It contained irrefutable proof of the offshore account, the payments to Scarlett Dubois, and the crown jewel, a secretly recorded audio file. Gabriel's team had managed to recover a conversation between Marcus and one of his co-conspirators, a disgruntled board member from a cloud backup. In the recording, Marcus laid out his entire plan. The sabotage of the merger, the use of the affair to spook the filly, his disgusting term for Isabella, and his strategy to trigger a hostile takeover using funds from their Cayman Islands entity. Isabella didn't leak the audio. That would be too simple, too chaotic. She decided to deliver the blow herself. She requested a meeting with the Sterling Holdings Board of Directors. The request, coming from the woman at the center of their company's downfall, was met with stunned confusion. But her family was still a major player in the global market, and refusing her would look weak. They agreed, holding the meeting in their cavernous, wood-paneled boardroom, the very heart of the Sterling Empire. Isabella walked into that room, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. She was dressed in a sharply tailored crimson suit, the color of power and blood. She was visibly pregnant, a silent testament to the personal cost of the drama, but her demeanor was pure steel. Leo was by her side, his presence a silent warning. Victoria, Richard, and the entire board, including a smug-looking Marcus Thorne, were seated around the massive table. Victoria's face was a mask of cold fury. Richard couldn't even look at her. He stared at the table, a broken man. "Thank you for seeing me." Isabella began, her voice calm and clear, filling the tense silence. "I know my presence here is unexpected. I am not here to relitigate the personal events of the past few weeks. I am here to talk about the future of this company." "You have no right to be here," Victoria snapped. "You have done enough damage." "On the contrary," Isabella replied, her eyes locking with Victoria's. "I am here because I am the only person in this room who knows the full truth of why your company is burning to the ground, and it has very little to do with my cancelled wedding." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose smug expression was beginning to falter, replaced by a flicker of alarm. For weeks you have all been operating under the assumption that this crisis was caused by a personal indiscretion. You are wrong. The affair was merely a tool, a brightly colored flag waved to distract the bull while the matador prepared the killing blow. She nodded to Leo, who placed a small, sleek speaker on the center of the table. I believe you all know Marcus Thorne, Isabella said, her voice dropping. You see him as Richard's loyal right hand, the future of this company, perhaps, but I'd like to introduce you to the real Marcus Thorne. She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the boardroom, arrogant and chillingly clear. The beauty of it is the simplicity. We let pretty boy Richard hang himself with his own zipper. The girl Scarlett played her part perfectly. The pregnant fiancés, the filly spooks, just like I said she would. She cancels everything, makes a big dramatic scene. The stock tanks on the personal drama. Then while they're all running around putting out that fire, the feds get the anonymous tip about the merger data. By the time they figure out what's really going on, we've already bought up 30% of the stock from the Caymans. We rescue the company. I take the throne. The Sterlings are history. The silence that followed the recording was heavier than a tombstone. Every eye in the room turned to Marcus Thorne. His face was the color of ash. He half rose from his chair, sputtering, trying to form a denial, but no words came. He was utterly, completely exposed. Victoria Sterling looked as if she had been turned to stone. The betrayal from her son was one thing, but this was a viper she had nurtured in her own nest, a man who had plotted the utter destruction of her life's work, while smiling to her face. Isabella pressed a second button, and an email was sent simultaneously to everyone in the room. That is the audio file. You will also now have a full dossier detailing Mr. Thorne's offshore accounts, his conspiracy with certain members of this board, and his long-term cultivation of Scarlett Dubois as a corporate espionage asset. I have taken the liberty of forwarding this entire package to the lead investigator at the SEC. I believe they will find it very illuminating. Marcus Thorne sank back into his chair, a dead man walking. His career was over. His freedom was next. Isabella finally allowed her gaze to fall upon Richard. He was staring at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea for a forgiveness he would never receive. He finally understood that he had not been a player, but a pawn. He had lost everything: his fiancée, his child, his company, his family's respect. Not for a passionate mistake, but as a calculated move in someone else's game. It was a truth more damning than any affair. As of this morning, Isabella announced, her voice ringing with finality, Rossi Lifestyle, through a subsidiary investment fund, has acquired a 28% stake in Sterling Holdings, purchased on the open market at its current distressed value. We are now the single largest shareholder. She let that bombshell settle. She owned them. We will be calling for an emergency shareholder meeting to remove the current board and install new leadership. My brother Leo Rossi will act as interim chairman. We will cooperate fully with the federal investigation. We will rebuild this company based on the Rossi values: integrity, transparency, and strength. She stood up. Her point made her victory absolute. She had not just weathered the storm. She had harnessed its power and used it to conquer her enemies. She walked toward the door, pausing only when she was level with Richard. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with a final dismissive indifference. You were right about one thing, Richard, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was a meaningless mistake. You are a meaningless man." With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the Sterling dynasty. She stepped out into the bright Manhattan sunshine, took a deep breath of the free air, and placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked a steady, strong rhythm. It was a new world, a new future. One she had secured not as a bride, but as a warrior. A queen who had faced down betrayal and built an empire from the ashes. And so the fairy tale wedding ended not with a kiss, but with a hostile takeover. Isabella Rossi walked away from the wreckage, not as a heartbroken victim, but as a triumphant queen who had turned the deepest betrayal of her life into her greatest victory. She proved that the strongest empires aren't built on contracts and mergers, but on unbreakable integrity and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman determined to protect her own. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating endings are merely the foundation for glorious new beginnings. What would you have done in Isabella's shoes? Could you find the strength to not only walk away, but to fight back and win? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, justice, and ultimate empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.